First story published when you were 19 in a major magazine. Was it Mademoiselle?
Yes.
I think it was, yes. Mademoiselle. There have been 58 books since then, 58 novels since then, and an enormous number of short stories. I'm a huge fan of Joyce's short stories, but there's also been plays and the libretto for an opera, poetry, one-act plays. I mean, essays, of course. Somebody once described Joyce's essay on boxing as the greatest essay about any sport by any person. And if you've never read that, it's actually a book now. It ran as an Esquire magazine piece, which is where I read it first. And then you expanded on it a little bit for the book, as I recall. It's wonderful. And it's a fruitless exercise to try to talk about all the awards that Joyce has garnered in her long life. And so I won't. But I will say National Book Award is right up near the top. Multiple nominations for that and Pulitzers. God, the only thing that she hasn't got that she deserves is the Nobel. And whenever I'm interviewed about who are my favorite writers and who should we know more about and everything, the one line I always have is Joyce is the greatest living writer who has not yet won the Nobel Prize. So there is clearly a great affection for me. And when I also said the wonderful Joyce, I also meant as a human being. I'm very blessed to be friends with Joyce, to have been friends with Joyce for a long time, and to continue to be friends with her. As a matter of fact, she dedicated this book to me. So my little bite of immortality is due to Joyce. So without further ado, let's chat a little bit. Well, tell me about this book. I published this book in addition to hosting the bookshop that where the party is tonight. The Mysterious Press published this book. As we've published about 18 or 20 books by Joyce now, because we do one a year. She has another publisher. But the good ones come to me.
Did you want me to stand up?
Yeah. No, you can sit. If you prefer to sit, we'll sit.
Okay.
So tell us about 48 Clues into the Disappearance of My Sister.
Well, it has kind of an interesting origin. The original version was a short story that I wrote really a long time ago, like many years ago, about a girl whose sister goes missing, and the consequences that follow with the family, kind of a disintegration of the family. So that was a long time ago. Then, literally decades later, I wrote a long story, which is called 33 Clues into the Disappearance of My Sister, which came out in Ellery Queen. So I like to encourage my students, I see some writing students here from NYU, I like to encourage young writers to publish something and see it in a magazine and sort of see it apart from yourself, and then look at it and see that might have the possibility of something longer. There's a different dimension when you see a work, I think, it's out there impersonally. You kind of see around it, see a different context when it's just yours, like in your computer. So when I saw it in Ellery Queen, and a number of people said to me, Joyce, that could be a novel. And then I just realized that to completely realize the themes and the characters, it doesn't need more space. So that's part of the background. That a friend who's actually in the audience here, and we were traveling, we went to Cayuga, which is one of the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. And we walked around the town, and there's a really old, distinguished small women's college there. And of course the lake is there. It's this little town, somewhat upscale, but also kind of remote. And something happened to me, just sort of a feeling I often have when I'm in a certain place, that this is the setting. This would really be a setting for a mystery. There's just something old, older houses, old distinguished houses, and kind of a hilly landscape, a glacier haunted landscape. So it's set in Cayuga by the lake, which is actually a real place. And then I wanted to structure it so that the very beginning, all the chapters are very short. So if you read it, don't be frightened. There are no long chapters. So I wanted the first chapter shows, it's very cinematic, and we see like the white slip dress, sort of a Dior, kind of a stylish slip dress of a woman that's just fallen onto the floor like a silky pool of this silky fabric that's somewhat ethereal, but there's no body there. But the girl is missing, but this is on the floor. Then the last chapter, which is also very short, is the last chapter. She does make an appearance, so she's.
Don't give away endings.
Well, that doesn't really tell them anything. It doesn't say anything, but she's embodied at the end. So the body comes there. So when I write a novel, I have to have the beginning and the ending. So then that gives it a kind of architectural soundness. Yeah. I didn't give away the ending, really. But I always say mystery and detective fiction and police procedurals are different from what we call literary mainstream writing, which is almost all sort of uncharted. When you publish something that's in a genre, you do owe the reader a realistic explanation of what happened.
Yes.
It can't just trail away in a kind of vapor, which is what we do when we're writing literary fiction. So I think there's a kind of implicit contract between the reader and the writer and the publisher with mystery fiction. It will be explained. It's not going to be supernatural. And it's going to actually make sense. You might not get it the first time, but it's there. So that's the contract that I feel that's necessary for mystery detective fiction. Do you?
I do agree. The structure of detective fiction and crime fiction, to broaden it just a little bit, is really the classic Greek arc of a beginning, a middle, and an end. Whereas a lot of contemporary fiction may have a beginning and a middle, and just lack an end. I call it, and no offense to anybody, I call it the New Yorker school of fiction. Beautifully written, superb prose, and it just doesn't go anywhere. I always find it somewhat unsatisfying. Not always.
That's not fair, Otto.
No.
New
Who said it's fair?
Yorker fiction has
Sometimes it
has
does.
a trajectory, and what you start reading in the beginning is not what you read at the end. I mean, a lot's going on in fiction that Deborah Treisman publishes is really quite good. But I think that was maybe true like in the 1950s, that the New Yorker fiction was much more sort of bourgeois or white upper middle class, and I don't think it was grappling with some of the issues that it does today.
Okay. You're entitled to your opinion. Although I don't read much New Yorker fiction anymore. Although
We do that.
I edit a series called The Best Mystery Stories of the Year, and it is common for us to have a New Yorker story in many of those issues, because there are exceptions where people actually do write endings to their stories.
Louise Erdrich. I think we published the
Who?
Louise Erdrich.
Yeah,
The Disaster Stamps of Pluto. That's
yeah,
nice.
and William Gay, the story that we were talking about before,
Well,
that was a New Yorker story, as I recall.
no, I don't think so. I think it was in Harper's.
Oh, maybe it was Harper's.
Not that it matters.
It
But,
was a long time ago, so I don't remember.
okay.
It's the only thing I've ever forgotten. So this was a little bit unusual for you to write this kind of book, where there was really detection, where they're really detectives in there asking questions. You write crime fiction, suspense fiction, obviously, but it's unusual for you to have written something where a detective is asking questions, trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah, I was thinking of the idea of clues. Like the word clues is something that's been sort of appropriated by, police, law enforcement. But we are all seeking clues in the world. We sort of look at people's faces and try to deduce what they're thinking. And we're always trying to figure out a narrative that we are somehow involved in and make sense of that. So this woman is very quirky and kind of unpleasant and funny. I hope she's sort of nasty and snarky, And she's so, if you look beneath that surface, she's just so lost. And she's so lonely and sort of desperate. And she's kind of looking for the lost sister who's somebody older than she is, and somebody much more successful and quite beautiful, and she's not beautiful. And so she's looking for the clues of the narrative that will give her life meaning. I think when you get to be a certain age, like when you're older, you're not any longer looking for clues because in a way your story is complete without that. But when you're a young person, when you're a child, you're an adolescent, in your 20s, you're still trying to create the narrative that will be your life, but you have to somehow conflate it with other people's interaction with your life. Does that make any sense? Mm-hmm. So we're constantly looking at other people and trying to assess what they think of us and trying to make sense of things. So some of the clues that she finds are genuine clues, but then some of them are not really clues. So it turns out, well, I don't want to say too much, but it turns out that a clue you think is a real clue just sort of evaporates and it isn't.
Well, it's one of the tropes of detective fiction is a mystery writer, let's say an Agatha Christie, would put things that look like clues and they're not. They're called red herrings.
Red herrings.
So it's unusual. That's why I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it's unusual for you to have written that kind of book. Did you find it difficult?
That's why I dedicated it to you. Well, now I'm working on a novel that is so exciting to me because it's a real thriller and a real mystery. This is two, but this is short. The one I'm working on now has a lot of characters, and it starts off with sort of a dismembered corpse. Fiction of this type often begins with a female body found, like a very beautiful woman. But I'm going to begin with a man. And I have to say, it's just so exciting and it's so much fun. So to me, the excitement of the writing is that it's experimental. And like writing really short scenes is interesting. Using a lot of parentheses, which I know I've been criticized for doing, but I thought, if everybody used parentheses, it would be tedious, but like only one or two people do it. But so much of our lives are parenthetical, like you are thinking and talking to somebody, but you have your own part of your mind is thinking something different. There has to be some way grammatically to express that in prose. In movies, someone who's having a quick thought, like could be a little glimmer of a face or a vision, or like just very fast. So the movie maker allows you to see that the person's not completely in the scene, like he's thinking of something. But with prose fiction, it's a little harder to do that. So I use the parentheses.
A lot of parentheses.
Yeah. Well, and some people don't like that, but I think it's sort of fun.
No, you have a way of writing. You have certainly, God knows, a style, and that style includes quirky things. Not only parentheses, but a lot of ellipses and exclamation marks. All of the tools that a writer uses, you use more, I think, than most other people do.
Well, it depends on what the book is, because each novel has its own voice.
Sure.
But I think using weird words and odd things is what you can do as an experimental writer. You know, if you're James Patterson, you're just going to sell 1 billion books, so nobody really wants to read anything experimental from you. But if you're not on that level, you know, you can just kind of experiment.
Yeah, sometimes some of your experimental stories are challenging.
Is that a dog whistle? Yes, I know Otto. Otto has sometimes been perplexed, shall we say, by some. Well, I had another whole phase of my personality where I like to write in Gothic and horror fiction, and that's surreal. That's not realistic. I mean, surreal writing and Gothic writing plunges into the unconscious, but mystery detection, I think, has to stay in consciousness mostly.
Yeah, it's difficult to combine the two forms, mystery detection and supernatural, because then you're not moored anymore. You don't have a place to know what's real and what's not real.
Absolutely.
And in supernatural fiction, that's okay because you're expecting
Yes.
that. But for a crime novel, a detective novel, you don't expect that. There are a couple of people who have actually managed to blend them. John Connelly is able to combine mystery detective fiction and supernatural fiction. And I think it's just miraculous that he's able to do that.
It's very hard to do. I would be interested in seeing what he actually did. Because once you bring the supernatural in, the whole idea like of a police procedural or clues and all that doesn't make any sense. Because it sort of undermines. It's like pulling the rug up from it. It's why in the past there could be lots of mysteries and things going on. People didn't have cell phones, so they couldn't just call one another. You know, as soon as you introduce cell phones and the kind of gadgets that we have today, that eradicates a lot of the difficulty of the adventure of being a detective. So I've noticed a lot of writers don't write in the present time.
Exactly.
No.
Set in 1964. Before.
Well, I think there are writers in the audience. This is true. I mean, once you introduce that, a lot, like maybe a plot of Dostoevsky or lots of plots, Moby Dick. You know, like you just put a call in or you look up something in Google, and the obstacles in the pathway of the plot would just disappear.
So do you want to talk about your next book at all? Do you want to tell more about it,
My
or
next book?
do you not want to?
Well, the one that begins with a dismembered person.
Sounds great.
He's a pedophile.
Deserves what he
well,
So he
got.
had it coming.
That's what you think. Well, I don't really want to go into that too much, but I wanted to sort of stress that, and I hope my students understand this too, that writing should be fun and experimental, and because it's fiction, we should do things that, you know, that allow us adventures. I have some students, not at NYU, I'm thinking of some other students elsewhere right now, but they have very mundane stories. Like, and I say, well, why don't you get off the New Jersey Turnpike and go out west? You know, like, you can do anything. Or they have people living in places that are not very interesting, like Rahway, New Jersey. You know, let's live somewhere else. And I'm kind of strict, and they have these kind of wistful looks on their faces, like, we could do that? I said, yes, you can do that. And you can make people wealthy, and you can make people homicidal and maniacs, and all kinds of things you can do because you're a writer. It doesn't have to be just sort of realistic, mundane writing.
One of the reasons that mystery writers are generally, as a group, the nicest people in the world is, which is true, because they can do the things that you were talking about. They can also take a person that they really hate in real life, put them into a book and kill them.
Why am I thinking of James Ellroy?
Oh, well, he doesn't like anybody, so he just kills everybody.
But don't you think he's sort of, in his heart, is sentimental?
No.
Otto is one of the few people still living, I think, who knew well Patricia Highsmith.
I did know her well, and let's say it was no joy in my life. She was one of the most horrible human beings who ever
I'd love to hear him say that. You'd think like he would have this little sentimental feeling like, oh, we had such a wonderful time. I published her books.
I did publish 6 of her books, but we did not have a wonderful time. Let's be clear about that. The books were great. She was horrible. So was Ruth Rendell, since we're on the subject. Great writer, who I also published. Great writer.
Well,
Horrible
I
human
can
being.
see what he's going to say about I was going to say about me.
No.
I published her, but she was so horrible.
No, I've already said wonderful, remember? That's where we
I know, but
started.
I'm here. Also, 2 women. Are there no men that you dislike?
There are plenty. But the worst of the men that I dislike were not as bad as Highsmith. They had a specialness.
So we're also curious.
It may be inappropriate for us to be talking about those people because their relatives might be in the room or watching us on.
On
Well, wouldn't
Twitter,
that make a wonderful
I'm
plot?
just getting you
Yeah.
into trouble on Twitter because you're
Yeah.
going to be charged with being a misogynist.
Of course,
Well, who knows? I mean, that's old hat. Like,
I've been accused of a lot of things in my life, and
you're not a misogynist.
I am not. Do you think I'm? Have you ever
No.
sensed for a second?
No.
No.
No, misogynists actually actively dislike women,
I love women.
which is quite the opposite of, misogynists and sexists are not the same. A misogynist is like a psychopathological person who literally loathes the physicality of women, like, having babies and pregnancy and all that. But a sexist could be somebody who actually likes women very much, or, the way he likes children or his dog, It's just like a sexist is somebody who doesn't put female on the level with male, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't like them. Whereas a misogynist is somebody who doesn't like them at all. And I think that there are many sexists, all sorts of sexist men, especially in the past, many writers like Philip Roth or John Updike and Sir Norman Mailer, but they liked women, and if they were friendly with women, they were very nice. It's just that when it comes right down to it, there's some sort of ideological or even political reluctance to grant other people, parity. Whereas misogynists, as I say, I think are psychopathological.
Yeah, I don't think women are at the same level as men. I think they're a step up.
Yeah, well, that's part of the problem. Because if women are expected to be up here, some women don't quite make that, so they're kind of down there. So
There's no winning, basically, is what you're saying.
oh yeah, just women are and transgender people. I mean, we're all humans, human people. Nobody's superior to anybody else as a category.
Well, generalizations are always a mistake. All
Yes.
generalizations are a mistake.
No, that's very true. Yeah.
Why don't we see if anybody has some questions that they might like to ask of you?
I have one here. So Joyce, I read the short story, so I know that story, and I'm curious, structurally, and how you went about expanding that story. If you sort of started with that and then, I don't know, broke it down, or if you started anew and just used that, how that process.
Well, I went into the almost the police procedural side of it, where there's an investigation and there's actually a detective and there's a private investigator too. So it's like the same story, but it's more, say you have a camera and you see something happening in the near distance, but then you bring the camera into the scene, so you're actually seeing some things that happen. Because we were talking about it in my class just today, when somebody disappears in our world, it's taken very seriously. and there's a lot of publicity, and there's a lot of all sorts of things are set in motion, people will remember the lost person the rest of their lives. You know, if somebody goes missing or is murdered on a certain day, say 1979, it's not just on that day. There's a ripple that goes through, literally through the generations, especially children. So one thing that you can do in a novel that you can't do so well in a story is go through a period of time, like 20 years go by. Oh, and then another thing that was very important to me, I did a lot of research into all the missing women, and particularly indigenous women and Black women, women and girls who are not, say, upper middle class white, but women and girls on the periphery. And there are so many of them. I did a lot of research into all the missing people. That's interesting. Like about 600,000 people go missing each year. And of that, a certain percentage, almost always around the same percentage, come back. They don't necessarily stay away. They're missing and they come back. And of that percentage that doesn't come back, a certain percentage is found dead, literally found dead. Then a certain percentage is never found. So from year to year, that doesn't change that much. And I was thinking, as a sort of from a philosophical perspective, why couldn't it not be a year when nobody goes missing? Why is it always 600,000? So say the year 2024, some people in this room will go missing because of that statistic that has to be borne out, and yet nobody would anticipate that. Like 600,000 people is a lot of people. And yet next year, supposedly, you know, in theory, they will go missing. Yeah, that was very interesting. So I was reading about, in fact, there's something on television right now, I think it's Netflix, Murder in Bighorn Country. Have any of you seen that? Can't believe I'm the only person. Often in my classes, I'm literally the only person who's seen some classic movie. I think am I some different dimension? Well, there's the 12th victim that's on now too. That's the Badlands. Of course, she doesn't go missing, but the two of them are on the same series. I think it is Netflix. So the murders in Bighorn County are about a Native American reservation in the West where women and girls go missing. Either their bodies are found or they just disappear, and the local authorities do very little to find them. So that's a series that's really interesting. In Canada, I think it's called The Highway of Tears. The indigenous girls and women often hitchhike on this highway. And why do they hitchhike? Because they don't have the money to own a car. So because of poverty, they're kind of out there in the world, and they're picked up by somebody and then they're murdered. It's called The Highway of Tears. So I used the opportunity to write a novel to do some interesting research. As Jonathan Santlofer has written these wonderful books that deal with art forgery, and stolen art, and so forth. And that's part of the wonderful aspect of being a writer.
Any other questions? Yes, you have a question.
A number of books that I've read of yours take place in upstate New York. And I just wondered, I think you grew up in there. What was your experience there? Good, bad, or what led you to set these novels, so many of them there?
Yeah, well, this is upstate New York too. Well, we all read about the places that we come from because we know them well. So Faulkner wrote about Mississippi, kind of made up a county, and Oxford is in his writing, but a lot of it, Yucatan County. You take Faulkner out of that place, and he's not really a very good writer. Something is just gone. Faulkner has a story called Penn Station, which is almost unbelievably bad. He had no feeling for it, you know. But a lot of mystery detective fiction is set in these regions. I mean, particularly Los Angeles and maybe New Orleans and Boston, and they're very specific to those places.
It used to be, I'm going to say half century ago or 60 years ago, pretty much every mystery was set in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco.
Yeah.
But now, and Boston. But now, really, people like Chuck Box, C.J. Box, sets his in Wyoming. Because that's where he lives, and he knows that neighborhood, and he makes that come alive. And there are other writers who have their little towns or their regions where they're familiar with everything that goes on with their neighbors and the local customs, the things that people do that don't pertain to big cities. And it really, if you read some of these writers, you really learn about a part of the country that you might never have known about or thought about in any other way.
I'm sure there have been studies done on the mystery detective fiction just of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler and McDonald.
Hammett was San Francisco.
Oh, okay. But there's something about that noir, the whole idea of noir almost seems to be generated out of Raymond Chandler, you know.
Oh, Chandler, Ross McDonald,
Ross McDonald.
of course, Elroy.
And James Elroy was very special. Of course, he's sort of late 20th century. But Michael Connelly,
Sure.
are all his stories, are all his fiction? And
I think so. I've read a lot of them. I don't remember them being anywhere else for an extended period of
I
time.
don't
Anyway.
either. Now, we didn't mention Michael Connelly, but he is a good example, I think, of a literary quality writer who uses the medium of mystery and police procedure to write. But I think the quality of his kind of consciousness, you know, like the literary voice, is very high. You know?
It is. And he's maintained it for more than 30 books.
And he started as a journalist.
Yep.
And he was reporting the LA police. I think he was assigned to the LA police. The seething cauldron of corruption and all sorts of other things like that. Yeah, so that's like a long answer to your question. You write about the place that you know. And upstate New York was formed by glaciers, you know, many millennia ago. And the landscape is sort of strange. And I grew up in Erie County and Niagara County and the Lake Ontario. What's called the lake effect, you probably know what that is, where the sky can be blue and then a few minutes later some clouds rush in. And I went to Syracuse University, which has the highest degree of clouds. Every year there are more clouds, cloudy skies. So all that is kind of part of this feeling that you have of geography as destiny and the atmosphere. Atmospherics are very important for prose fiction.
Sure.
Bonnie?
Do you ever scare yourself when with the characters that you write? You're like a dismembered pedophile, and then you're doing research on women that are disappearing on this highway of tears. I would have nightmares. So do you ever end up accidentally giving yourself nightmares about what you're writing?
Well, I'd have to say, maybe parenthetically, that nothing is so terrifying to me as real life.
Mm-hmm.
So real life is a problem. Fiction is like an attempt to solve that problem. I mean, with fiction, everything is selected and we have a story, and often it may have an upbeat ending and it may bring your characters to a very good place. Whereas with life, you know, basically we lose one another. You know, at the trajectory of life is you just have more and more losses. So life, I can't actually handle life too well. So it may be one of the reasons that I find writing and art or movies so entrancing, because that's the realm where there is a kind of coherence. And I also feel that we grow up surrounded by mystery, that when we're first born, we're in a cradle and we're lying helpless, actually, literally, and kind of looking up, and we see these faces leaning over us, and our eyes are blinking rapidly, and little infants' brains are taking in so much from the environment, just astonishingly. They're taking it in wide-eyed, but essentially they have to put together some sense to all this, and they learn who's the mother, and this is Dada, and that's somebody else, you know. Like the characters start filling in, and then they're able to be upright at a certain point, which we don't remember. We're able to walk. First we fall down a lot, then we're able to walk. And then we kind of walk around, and then we go through a door, and we're outside. Like one step after another is this mystery is all around us. And then when we get older, we're sort of confronted with all the things that our parents didn't tell us, but were there. And we learn something about our family that we didn't know when we were a child. And it's like one revelation following another. So to me, as Ada was saying, the very beginnings of our art and the Greek dramas, they were almost all mystery stories. Like Oedipus, he solves the mystery of who's doing all these bad things. It's him. You know? That's sort of, in some way, the most profound plot of all. Like the detective is looking for the cause of the corruption of the city, but he finds out it's him.
Yep. Okay. I think this would be a good time for, if you would like to get your book signed, please come up. I'm going to suggest that we sort of make a line in some way on that side of the room so that it's not a mob scene. Bring your book, and Joyce will be happy to sign for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.